The industry, as we all know, is growing very rapidly, and podcasting is becoming quite ubiquitous. What advice would you have for someone who's looking to get started in the podcasting space today?
I would say the most important thing to realize is that podcasting isn't for everyone. So the first question that you need to ask yourself is, what's the medium that I actually enjoy not only consuming, but participating in? Not everyone's a video person. Not everyone's an audio person. Not everyone's a writer or a speaker, right? So I think you have to be very honest with yourself. You have to feel called to it, And I think whenever I've instructed or coached or brought people through the process, it's always started with you have to have the fire in your belly and you have to already know that it's for you. And I think that's one of the most important first pieces to cross. That's the first bridge to cross. And by far would be the first piece of advice I would give everyone. The second piece would be, what are the goals that you're looking to achieve? And then if we can get through those two, you'll be well on your way.
What are some things that make someone a great podcaster?
A great podcaster, I believe that people who are able to look outside of the conversation, people who are able to extrapolate. I would also say people that are able to try to ask the questions that they believe are the questions that aren't being asked. There's so much content now online. There's everyone talking about everything. And I think what listeners, or I would say just consumers in general, are really looking for is a conversation that is novel and that is unique from a perspective that they don't get somewhere else. So what makes a good podcaster is a person who can kind of weave a narrative. They can be a good storyteller. I think you have to be an incredible listener, because I think what most people, where they go wrong, and you ask me what makes people good, but I think approaching this from the thing that I see that goes wrong is that a lot of people get into podcasting because they really want to make it so much about what they know or who they are or what they really want to achieve with it. And that can incredibly get in the way of growth, and also just kind of likability. So I'd say one thing is that you have to have a lot of humility. You have to be far more interested in someone else rather than being interested in your self-serving abilities. And I think that's what makes, if I had to sum it in the most concrete way possible, it'd be something like that.
Because you think a lot of the podcasts that succeed, the people, they do it less to hear themselves speak, and they do it more because they're genuinely curious of the person sitting across from them.
It's a genuine curiosity for sure. And I think that rubs people the right way. And they get to feel curious. They get to feel insightful. I mean, that's the thing. When someone asks, when you have a really great conversation with someone, and you have someone listening to that conversation, the piece that is most important to get right from the podcasting angle is being able to, what's the best way to say? The curiosity piece is the most important. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that you have to be able to have humility and help people come along that journey with you and not feel like it's forced. When you listen to someone and you can kind of feel like they're maybe a bit too self-serving, or they're talking a bit too much about something, or it just feels like it's there's a narrative that's kind of getting pushed and you're like, I don't like this. I don't know. This isn't, you want to feel like you're almost a listener. The consumer is almost discovering it in real time with that person. I think that's what also makes good podcasters, good hosts, are the people that are able to do that with divine creativity.
I think that's some of the best storytellers too. They take you through the arc with them, and it's, as they're explaining the story, you're discovering the process of the story unfolding with them. Because I've also listened to audiobooks where it's very by rote and it's very challenging to get through the audiobook. But then there's McConaughey's book, Greenlights.
Yeah.
That pulls you through the entire way, because it's almost as if when he's reading the words about himself, even though it was his life lived, he is discovering the story anew. And that's something that I really like McConaughey for, not only his acting prowess, but a lot of the stuff that he's done outside of that world too. And I think that his ability to share and storytell is something that's unmatched.
Yeah, storytelling is a key cornerstone in any. I would say it's we're talking about podcasting, but I believe any medium is storytelling. So storytelling is the cornerstone of good content and good journey. Wathey is actually phenomenal at that. He's one of my favorites, honestly. I haven't read that book though. I know about it.
Phenomenal book.
Yeah.
That'll be my gift back to you. Do you think curiosity is innate, or do you think that's something that can be learned?
I think every person who's born is naturally curious. I think if you look at small children, if you look at infants, and even like kids through, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, or 7 years old, up to 8 years old, I think there is an innate curiosity within us as humans. I think that's, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I think we got that pretty right, I do believe that our society and our family structures, our friend structures, or people who we put around ourselves, and the conditioning of children and coming into being young adults, I think that potentially is an area where things do get lost. I think if you put a child like out in a yard, what are they going to do? Right? They're probably going to rip up some grass. They're probably going to pick up some stones. They're probably going to break some stuff. I think we're just so naturally curious. But I do believe that the process by which culture and family structures do try to mold children into something that maybe they think the children should be is where we might start to lose creativity. And that's my personal view, not to say that it's what everyone should be, but I think that we do tend to lose it. And I think it also comes down to good parenting to be able to maybe dial in how do we actually have these people. Yeah, because we all, we go through childhood, and then we get into school, and then we maybe go to college, and all that is just rules and restrictions. All that is, it's rules and restrictions, and I think that starts to tamp down a bit on creativity. And especially if you go into certain fields or you study certain subjects, I think it starts to get even more rigid. Now, obviously, if you're going to a music school or a film school, there might be, I think at that point, creativity has to be obviously driving the front seat for you. But I do believe that everyone possesses it. And I think that maybe part of our responsibility is getting back to some of that.
In what way has creativity structured or provided a through line within your own life to bring you to the podcasting space today?
How creativity has been a part of me ever since I was a small child. I was very fortunate going back to the inception point. I was born on a family farm in Massachusetts, and I think the act of kind of growing up a bit like a farm boy, country boy, you are just immersed into the playground of life. And I'm very fortunate to have that experience, because I think that those years really fostered a lot of questioning why things were and how things are. My mother was a scientist. My father was a builder, electrician, musician, farmer. So one side of my upbringing was creativity, but there were also ridges and structures around how you had to be creative, right? You had to have control groups, and you had to, you run experiments, and you look at this, and this is fact, and we know this, right? There's all these but you can be creative, but it was a different way of looking at it. My father, on the other side, was a dreamer and a builder, and he could envision and build things where things weren't yet. And I think growing up with that dynamic, I got a really interesting scope of what it means to be creative. So going down to the ponds and the bogs, grew up on a cranberry farm. So we basically, had bogs and all this stuff everywhere, and go take mason jars and take a scoop of water. And then I go run up to the house, and my mom would have all these microscopes, and I'd take little vials out, and I'd put things down, and I'd look at it, and I'd be like, oh, this is so cool. Why is this? And I think those informative years were so interesting, because I realized that from a very young age, I started asking a lot of questions of why something was. And bringing this into creativity, I believe that you have to have some version of just not giving about if you're right or wrong, and just asking the questions and seeing what you kind of discover in the process. And like, I think that there's something a bit about that really resonates with me. The other side is I grew up with a bluegrass band in my living room every Thursday. So my father was a musician. So by age 6, I was picking up a guitar. And by 8, I was singing and playing songs. And then by 10, I'm writing songs. And then, so that progresses all the way into a whole nother story. But, I think that there's a lot of creativity from a very young age, and music became a very, very key part of that story, and how it obviously segued eventually into podcasting.
So there's two sides here I want to hone us in on. So we have the creative act, Rick Rubin, the book you brought out right before, that is a very much free-flowing approach to creativity. And then you have people like Jim Collins, who are very structured and segmented, who believe in discipline in service of creativity. Where do you fall on the spectrum, or believe the spectrum exists from a creative standpoint? Let's start there.
Yeah, I believe that there's spectrums to everything. And I think that it's up to the individual to discover where they may sit on the spectrum. When it comes to rigid or free-flowing, I am very much I believe maybe more of a free-flowing. Like I feel like I can just kind of sit down and go. But there are moments where I might be energetically or emotionally or physically just kind of like wiped, where it's just like hard to kind of sometimes do the thing. But like if I just recharge, I can just pretty much go. Like if I'm creating video content, or I'm writing songs, or I'm writing or doing something at the agency, like, there's a lot of creative stuff going on at a podcast agency, so you have to be creative all the time. But I believe that I'm more of a free flowing. I think that I put in the reps from a very young age. And I think this is what's maybe interesting about this discussion, is that I started playing music at 6 years old. By 18, I had a record deal. And then by 22, 23, I was performing in front of audiences and touring and all that stuff. Between 6 years old and 23, 24, I actually can't calculate how many hours I've spent. It's obviously well past the 10,000 hour rule at that point. And I think that it's not that I was forced into anything, but like the nature of doing that career trajectory was like, you're playing and writing all the time. There's a lot of rigidness to it. Like you're getting up and you're having to play. There's shows that are booked, you have to play, right? There's album deals and you have to actually write songs and deliver. And the only way to get to that level, to be able to write songs that are good enough, you gotta write every day. And there has to be some rigidness to that. Now being 31, I'm getting on a different phase of life. And I feel like all of those formidable years kind of gave me this muscle that I can just kind of engage whenever I want. So to answer your question, I believe that there's a spectrum to everything, but I also believe that I think it depends on like how you come at it. And I think that even you and your experiences had a lot of reps in probably a certain area. And I know that you were heavy into sport, into hockey. So like I can imagine that the calculation of playing sport and doing hockey and being on a team and understanding plays and having to be in the moment, spontaneously creative, and how you're going to get from that puck from one side of the court to the other with a team. I believe that ability in those reps in a rigid way gave you the ability to probably do a lot of things that you do now. But I think that you get to do it in a bit more of a free way. And that's just me assuming, but that's also just me looking at my experience. So I believe that everyone has the ability to be creative. I think it kind of depends where were your reps and have you done the reps yet?
Was there ever a point when music became a have to do, that you lost the desire to want to play because it was something that you were required to rather than you got to?
Yeah. I've always loved music, and performing is one of my favorite pastimes, and all roads still lead to the stage. But there is a level where I think it's like anything. What I went through is like any business. Like quite literally, you have shareholders and stakeholders and people involved that are supporting you to become successful. And I think when you get at a certain level, there is a pressure where some of the magic slightly lost, and it does become slight monotony. And you write a good song and people like that song, and you end up having to play that song all the time. And if you haven't played a song 1,000 times, by 999, it starts to get a little old. And that combined with the pressure of, oh, you need to keep going, you need to keep doing, there is a, and also that with trend and desire and consumption, what do people now want? Consumption models are changing. And as a creative, that's a really cool task because it makes you evolve, but also it can, if you don't do it right, you can potentially get yourself in a scenario where you're walking down a pathway you actually don't want to walk down. You don't want to actually create that type of music, right? There's lots of bands in history that, especially after the 90s, because the 90s was like that last heyday of like unbelievable music. Like we think about Nirvana, right? We think about, the unbelievable rock bands. After that, like we've kind of moved into this place where, hey, well, the data is telling us that the streaming rates in Mexico are up with all the listeners in rock and pop. So we need to actually move these together, and we need to get a Latino collaborator in here. And, it's like there is now more of a scientific model around the business of streaming and ticket sales. And not to say that wasn't still there, but I believe that it's turned into, with the ubiquitous nature of data and the internet to understand audiences, it's kind of now like data first, and then like, what's the music we need to put in there, opposed to the bands that were grinding it out throughout the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And then you just discover like this music. And it was just like, oh my God, no one wanted Jimi Hendrix. They got Jimi Hendrix. No one was sitting around a board table saying like, well, our numbers are up, Kevin, from last year in this scenario. You know what? We need to get a guy that, with a guitar, and he needs to do really weird shit, and let's put him on some drugs too. Like, no, none of this was planned. That was literally like maybe the spirit of creativity, like the spirit of just like really, it's interesting now to see kind of like where we're going. I think it's all still good, but it's definitely different from, and this gets back to a question of creativity and, where does it come from? And, it does get old if you're walking down a path that doesn't feel true to you. But I think as long as you feel like your heart's in it and you're really, really excited every day, yes. But I have 100% have my moments where I was like, I'm not liking this anymore. And when you're playing 3 shows a day, 4 months straight, it gets old.
There's an interesting parallel, I think, now between anything, but we'll focus on podcasting here and the creativeness of music as well, because what you don't see, you see the podcasters who are at the top of their field, but what you don't see are the 400, 500, 600 shows that came before they got to the place where they hit the charts. And there's a level of consistency and repetition and monotony that comes with anyone who is anything great at anything. And it sounds very similar with music. It's like you don't recognize all the hours you put into it until you got to a point where you had a record label and were touring. From a perspective of podcasting, what would be someone who has a podcast who has been doing it for a couple of years, they've got maybe a couple hundred shows, and they're not yet to the place that they want to be? What would be the way to approach that, or how would you coach someone through continuing that path? Or is there a specific question you would have them ask themselves to see if that's even something that they want to continue?
Yeah, it'd be the latter there. So the question that I would ask them is, what are you actually wanting to build? And if you can envision a future, and ideal results or achievements, what would those things be? Write those down. Are you looking for more vanity? Are you looking to grow more audience? Are you looking to grow your business? Are you looking just to connect yourself with interesting people that are going to serve what outcome? I think the question is kind of like, are you doing this to be popular, or are you doing this to serve some other feature? And I think this is where a lot of people do get confused and caught up. And I'm empathetic to that, because we live in a world where the numbers of everything, like, follower count and view count, like everyone's so fixated on just having numbers, where they actually lose the value in just creating a product or a show that connects really interesting people together, which can build a lot of very interesting things off the mic. And so that's the question I would ask, like, hey, like, what are you looking to achieve here? Because there's only two routes to go in podcasting. The first route is the traditional advertising model. And when I say there's only two routes, I mean, like, there's only like two ways to build a business around podcasting, or kind of like go in a direction. The one direction is a traditional like broadcasting model, where you're basically building the largest audience possible to monetize it with ads. And you want to get a good CPM, and you want to get a good agency that can rep you, and you're going to have Athletic Greens and Whoop and all your favorites, like sponsoring that show. That's one lane. And I've done that lane, and have shows that have, been doing tens of millions of downloads a year, and like they're successful from that perspective. The far majority of the people that I work with are in the other lane, which are leaders, coaches, entrepreneurs, online business owners, who are at a stage where they know how important it is to create content and be online. And they're looking for a medium to do that in the most effective and efficient way. And most of their goals aren't fixated around like having 1 million YouTube subscribers or 1 million active listeners. It's more about like, hey, I want to be able to connect with 200 ICPs, or ideal client profiles, every year, and I want to be able to do this in the most effective way possible. By the way, I also want to be able to create content, and I want to grow my authority within my field. Podcasting is perfect for that. And that lane there is very interesting, because when you focus on that lane, you're able to be a bit more prescriptive and targeted with like your goals and your outcomes. Like, instead of having a ubiquitous number, you're kind of like, wow, 200 people? Got this in the bag. We can find 200 people. We could do that. We could rinse, repeat that. Those are those two lanes. And I coach and I talk to a lot of people about those two lanes. And by far, the majority of them get basically they get way more clear on the results that they really want to achieve, and really why they want to do it to begin with. Because most people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to be famous. And I'm like, hey, let's find something a bit more tangible, because that shouldn't be the choice point, because you'll be chasing that forever. Because 100,000 people, 200,000 people, 1 million people, it literally is never enough, right? And anyone who's ever gotten there will know that, like, once you reach that milestone, you're not any more happier. You might be a little bit more successful from a monetary perspective, but like, it's not fulfilling you, and then you just want the next hurdle.
And even then, with some of the larger followings, you recognize that they don't know how to monetize their following in the way that someone with a smaller, more engaged audience would.
Let me tell you this. I've launched hundreds of shows, and I've launched shows, like I said, that do tens of millions of downloads a year, all the way down to 1,000 downloads a year. Do you want to know the shows that make the most amount of money and how many downloads they get a year? On average, 5,000. It's because they are so niched, and they are so perfectly positioned within their field and their industry that they're talking to exactly the avatar that they want to. And obviously, having high ticket products and services really help. But if you can meet those quotients, it's interesting. Most people are like, oh, you're so successful. You have all these people looking at you. And like, yeah, sure, those shows, there's some shows that do really well. I mean, look at Armchair Anonymous, look at Joe Rogan, look at the massive behemoths. Of course they're doing great, it's really, in my experience and what I've done, I've always noticed that it's like actually the shows that run amazing shows, but they're just literally for that one type of avatar. And they kill it.
Do you think that that is because as a society we're conditioned to believe that bigger is better?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And more important, right? Goes back to the Romans, It's like, let's build that big round thing. Let's put like 100,000 people in it. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, I built that. You know what I mean? Like that energy. Yeah, I think we're all conditioned to, someone who has more following is more important or more valuable. And obviously, it couldn't be further from the truth. I know people who are way smarter than people who have, like really, really big following. So it's funny.
And when people stay in there, it's interesting too, because there's the intelligent avatars that have the large following, but often aren't as adept or versed in that specific field as someone who spent their entire time sitting in a room actually in love with the act of doing the thing. And I've said this quite a bit, and this has become kind of like a moniker of my own, but it is do the verb instead of being the noun. And as I've gone through life, I've recognized within myself that there's a lot of times that like I acted and played hockey because I wanted notoriety and fame in a way. And it was a very significance-driven approach to life. Yeah. And then you realize that you get whatever, like the next hurdle, and you continue to build up. And like I didn't play pro or get to a place that I thought I was going to, but I recognized that the farther I got in a sport, the farther away I was from being connected and in tune with myself. And
amen, brother. Jesus.
And as I shifted and redefined what success looked like for myself, the happier and happier I got with what I was doing, because success wasn't an end goal for me. Success became continually striving, but never sacrificing the present.
Right.
Like striving happily.
I reached a very similar point within music. With the Nashville, there with the band, doing the whole thing, kind of like it's all being laid out for you, and I definitely lost myself, and I think I also lost just the meaning and purpose. I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I wanting to do this right now? And also, hard questions start to get asked. It's like, wow, we've gone so far, and it's also, if anyone who hasn't put a band together and gone on the road and done the whole thing, it's not easy. It's not easy to keep the relationships together and all the energy together. It's definitely, it's like elite type of building a team, because it's not only like you have execution things, but like you're also all kind of living together, traveling together, you're eating together, and you're playing together. And there's also a lot of emotions involved in that. But, long story short, that happens for so long. And then you start to realize, like, wait a second, what do I want to do? Like, I've got caught up in all this. And I had very similar questions that I asked myself. And, luckily I had other things that I was also doing. And I realized that there was another door that I could open. And the moment that I opened that, I was like, wow, I can still write music and still play music, but also do other things and like have my own life. Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah. So you there talk about the challenges that come with playing music and touring and growing a band to the pinnacle of music.
I wouldn't say the pinnacle of music. There's definitely bands that made it a lot further than we did.
Correct, but the intention was to get to the pinnacle.
Yes.
What are some of the common challenges that you see with podcasters growing and expanding and working towards reaching, quote unquote, the pinnacle of their vertical?
They get too rigid. They get too, and it gets back to creativity, right? It's like they get too rigid. They don't evolve enough, and I think they let other forces outside of themselves affect the decisions that they need to make. And they lose a bit of that magic. And I think it's really important to try to make sure that you understand what your magic is and understand what that feeling is. And evolving yourself to keep that energy alive, and it will shift and change. And I think I see that parallel between creating a great show, content channel, podcast, creating a great band or music endeavor. It's all kind of very similar. And I think the moment that you start to get complacent with yourself, oh, this is easy. We're just like doing it every day, every week, and this is fine. If you get too comfortable, no, that's where I kind of see people start to take a turn for a direction that they don't want to go. They get too comfortable. They don't start challenging themselves. And you should be very, very cautious of that in almost any creative pursuit.
So does that look like going through the motions then? Is that how you see that? Where I show up, I record, I post the episode, and then rinse and repeat, rather than saying what worked here, what didn't work here?
You should always be asking yourself questions, but also if you don't feel personally challenged in that pursuit of talking to that individual, if you're not learning something new, if you're not turned on in any way, right? There's a lot of like nuances to it. But you should feel like, it's kind of like that saying, like you should never be the smartest person in the room. Not quite applicable here, but the idea of that and being challenged is important. Like, if you are someone who's creating a channel, and if you're not ever so often nervous and kind of like, oh my God, how's this gonna go? Like, I don't know that this guy seems like really cool, or like, whatever that thing might be. Like, I'm like, who am I? Like, if you're not having any of those feelings anymore, like, either you're like 55 years old and you've totally arrived, but if you're not 55 and you're like, in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, like, maybe try to challenge yourself, like try to have a conversation with someone that's really fucking difficult. And I think that's what I see, is that a lot of people kind of like stick in a lane. And I'm like, we were talking about this earlier off mic, it's like polarity is one of the things that really accelerates growth now. Because people really want diverse perspectives. They don't want to be talked to. They want to kind of feel a part of that push and pull in a conversation. So polarity plays a very interesting role where the listener can kind of play in that polarity, like, what side are they on, right? I think that's another layer to this, is that, like, having diverse opinions and people who don't agree with you is incredibly important. There's some podcasters now that are doing this, and they're taking advantage of an opportunity. I believe that's going to be the opportunity of a lifetime right now, is that Lex Friedman was one of the first to ever do this. Joe Rogan is someone, I'm not saying that I'm like a big fan of all these guys and I agree with everything they say. I do enjoy them. I think they're pretty great. But they are some of the first people to ever bring on complete polar opposite opposing views. They've now built platforms that are bigger than traditional media. Like, I don't know if everyone knows this, but like, this blows me away. I didn't know this like a while ago. Joe Rogan has a larger viewership every episode than like half of the news networks combined at one single like primetime show. Give you like the average like Fox News CNN show, they'll get like 4 million people, like 100. like it's, these guys have so much opportunity to, I would say, do the right thing, and help people see the other perspective. And I'm very, very excited to see where that goes.
So that'd be one strategy, is engaging in polarity within podcasting. Are there any other strategies or tips that you've seen that have worked really well in growing and building a loyal audience within podcasting?
Yes. I'm going to give you two. Number one is polarity, to your point and to the conversation, is incredibly important, but you need to be very careful about how you do that, because you don't want to piss off the wrong people. So you need to layer that in very creatively. So you can start with very easy things like, don't do this, because this could happen. Or you could just start with very like simple, almost like negative starts. You could start to layer in eventually guests that could have another view or experience, but you need to do that very carefully, because like, if you don't do it the right way, like, you could have a really weird interaction with someone. So finding those individuals would be a thing. So, but that's very interesting, and that will help you grow not only the show, but it will help you grow your secondary or other primary pieces of social media, right? You take all that, you clip it all down, and then you have all these little micro moments. The second way, which I would argue to be probably the number one here, is targeted outreach. This is something that we've been perfecting for years now. And what most people don't end up doing, most people end up just being like, oh, I know a lot of people and I'm gonna go like just talk with those people. And that's what we're gonna do. Another interesting perspective, and again, this only aligns with, hey, what are your goals with the podcast? So a lot of these journeys here can be different depending on what your goals are with it. But I want to take the perspective of, the majority of people that I work with, kind of business owners who are wanting to build an entire content channel around their business and their story, and also put them in contact with their collaborators, their clients, and their colleagues. In this outreach model, the scale that you can reach people now and targetedly is immense. So create a show or a format of your show where you speak with your ideal client or ideal collaborator, if fill in the blank that person. And now with all these platforms and tools, like you can create custom content that says, hey, I found you here and here, and I run this show, and I would love to talk about your experience doing XYZ. What we do is we help this community figure out all these problems and grow, and make it about them and their experience and how they can actually help the greater community. This puts you in direct contact with your ideal people that you're trying to reach. Not only does it create content, but it creates a unique, warm experience to build a relationship that you would have not built with that person in any other way. And when you can rinse and repeat that outreach strategy, and you can reach out to more and more, hundreds and thousands and then tens of thousands of people over a longer period of time, you basically curate these incredible lead lists of individuals who are literally the people that you're trying to reach. And then you can use those lists for other reasons. But I have found that one strategy has been highly effective for all of the clients that we work with. We rinse and repeat that across all their channels. And it pretty much just puts the ideal listener into the driver's seat. And then our obviously these shows can connect and collaborate with the people who they really want to collaborate with.
Are those ideal lists also people who they would potentially have on the podcast as well?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of different strategies that you can run. So like a guesting strategy would be just going out and just talking to people who could be a good guest. Another one is like a listener strategy. All of the, we could do all the above. You could do direct asks, where it's like you're just kind of like saying, hey, I run this show and I find you interesting. I'd love to talk to you about what you're doing. I think that we could create a lot of value, or whatever it might be. We can do this till cows come home until the right strategies. But yeah, the idea is, instead of focusing so hard on a kind of fuzzy and blurry audience that we want, let's focus on just the one person. And then let's send a lot of messaging to a lot of those people and try to build interactions that are incredibly authentic.
What does that messaging look like?
So the message, like I'll give you an example. So let's say we have a health and wellness show, and this health and wellness show has a leader who's a coach who runs a program, and maybe has some services, and stuff like that. And his whole idea is that he wants to basically talk with founders. He wants to talk with founders of companies who do CrossFit, do cold plunges and saunas, and really cares about like their well-being and their high performance. So what we do is we create a show all about performance, interviewing all the diverse perspectives around how performance works. What are the inputs that you put into performance? What do you get out of it, right? So what are all these things? Now for that show, let's say if it's a founder that we want to reach, so what's the messaging for that founder? So we know that we could build a show around a format that could be like, we want to hear from founders and what's working for them, because we know that if we can have those conversations, that's going to help our community of all these founders. Who are you going to learn best from? Someone who's put the reps in and has done it in maybe a new and interesting way, or someone who's just theorized it? You're going to want to hear from the guy that actually done the back to your point about the verb and not the noun. So I would say the messaging there would be, hey, founder, I see that you're doing X, Y, Z, and, I have this podcast, and we're doing, our whole mission here is to elevate founders in the modern world through X, Y, Z. And I think that you could have invaluable experience for a community. We'd love to have a conversation with you. You want to hop on a discovery call, right? So something like that would be a very effective outreach strategy to go off and find a bunch of founders and say like, hey, like we'd love to have you on. And then you curate your list and you kind of cherry pick from there.
And then those people that you're reaching out to would obviously also then be interested in potentially being a listener of the podcast as well.
Not only a listener to the podcast, but a collaborator, maybe a client, maybe a joint venture partner, So the world does open up. And I think as long as you lead with like that authenticity of like wanting to make everyone the best person possible, people are really into that type of tribalism of,
Taking a quick break from this episode to remind you that your inputs matter. This show was designed and created to help you build a high-performing, healthy, wealthy life. So if you feel that you're getting value from this episode, please go ahead and share it with someone that you feel would get value as well. Now, fun fact, 90% of listeners of this show are not actually subscribed to the podcast. So if you would take a moment and go ahead and tap the subscribe button, it would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for being here. Now back to the show. So there's clipping down of a show to social media, but then there's also now the ability to engage in comments on shows like Spotify and on YouTube. How important is it for a podcast host to actually be engaging with the audience and focusing on building relationships with the people who are commenting?
Yeah, I mean, incredibly important, right? There's a difference between YouTube and Spotify and Apple. There's, a lot of people look at podcasting and it kind of is confusing. Podcasting essentially is an RSS feed, which essentially is just a feed of content. And you will basically ping into that feed. And when you get a new download, then you'll pull the download from that feed. That's traditionally how it's worked for a very long period of time. Apple really made this incredibly popular. It existed before, but Steve Jobs with his whole development around the iPod and then the iPhone and really made that take off. We're now moving into a streaming world, and there is a incredible battle that is currently going on in the marketplace that not too many see. Spotify has spent around well over $100 million in acquiring talent and technology. Megaphone and Anchor being two of the very large purchases that they made. I'm not even counting the acquisitions of Call Her Daddy or Joe Rogan, right? The exclusivity deals that they did. So Spotify knows that that this is going to be a thing that they're going to dominate in the future. And what people, I would say, need to understand is that these platforms are all changing very rapidly. And I think it's really important to stay up to date on like how to use these platforms. Spotify obviously rolls out comments and polls within their video episodes. It's also one of the only platforms in the world where you can kind of like for free do your RSS feed and also video podcasting. YouTube's another really great example of that. But also the YouTube algorithm is a 100% of a different environment than Spotify. So it's kind of convoluted, right? Like, well, where should I be? What should I be doing? At the end of the day, you should start in one environment and get very comfortable and then start moving to another. It's incredibly important to engage with all those comments. I would encourage people to develop content that helps spark engagement within the listenership. So speaking to them, asking them to do things within an episode, leaving Easter eggs, right? Like as people are listening, especially once you get past about 15 minutes into an episode, that's the moment where you know that you have them. If someone's listened for more than 15 minutes, like they're invested at this point. They're probably a super fan, and they really, really care about your engagement. So like at that point, that's when like traditionally where people want like good mid-roll ads because they know that the most agreeable or spendable clienteles are listening at that moment. So once you get through 15 minutes, Easter eggs, have, a really easy one to do is just being like, hey, by the way, if you're really liking this conversation, what we would love to learn is like, what other pieces of topics are you wanting, or what other guests do you want? Like, would you like me to do a continuation of this episode? Say that at minute 25, right? And the people who really care are going to action on that. They leave it in the comments, right? Right? That rinse and repeated over a long period of time will have very positive effects.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't thought about it in terms of using that to spark engagement to then continue down the path of building more and more content specific to what the audience is actually looking for. That gives me some ideas myself.
Yeah, good.
What are some other opportunities or things that are coming in the pipeline right now that you see that people, specifically podcasters, could capitalize on?
I think, so video podcasting is not, let's say, a new idea. People have been putting long format content on YouTube for a long time. Now, Spotify has acquired Anchor, they've acquired Megaphone, which were basically very large distributors where people would upload their podcast to get their podcast out into the internet. They've now rolled out this video podcasting feature. And I am a strong advocate that the people who can start producing video first podcasts and then using that content to then kind of get yourself onto another platform and building a very strong engine there is a huge opportunity. Just from a time perspective and being very efficient with the type of people that you want to speak to, it's just a very effective medium. But I believe everyone now at our agency is all video first, and we produce everything video first. It's no longer just audio. Obviously, there are some platforms that will only deliver audio, like Apple Podcasts. But I think that there's a very unique moment right now where Spotify has over 50% of the podcast market, and they've acquired all the cool kids, and they've acquired all the cool tech. And I'm like, there's a moment here that's happening that everyone should now, if they're interested in that, is to go in and they should do it video, and they should get it everywhere as much as possible. And I think running a video first podcast effectively and then layering on a really strong repurpose strategy is that I think there's that moment in that we're in right now, because most podcasts are not video first. Most podcasts are all just audio. So the opportunity is way less on an audio first podcast, because you're just dealing with audio, so you can't create a whole lot of content. But once you add video, layer video into the mix, now you're platform agnostic. You can go almost anywhere. You just have to have a good editor, a good strategy, and an ability to create new stories and narrative with the content that you've had. And going back to one of your first questions, what it takes to be a good host. Really great hosts are going to be able to layer in these strategies where they're able to communicate to the audience throughout the episode, leaving Easter eggs, asking them for feedback, but then also be able to direct the conversation and perform in a way where they are thinking of the edit. So I used to run a video marketing agency, and we would always talk about shoot to edit, shoot to edit. That means when we're in the field with our cameras and we're shooting, we're thinking about the edit that we want to make. So really good hosts and really are going to start to get good at okay, great. How am I thinking about the short format? And what do I want in this episode? So while you're in real time, you're doing kind of almost a performance act of being I know I'm going to want certain things. Let's make sure that we go certain places.
It's a really good piece of advice. Is there anything else? And thank you, by the way. This has been very eye-opening and phenomenal. Cool. Is there anything else that is top of mind presently about podcasting that you feel the listeners should know?
Assuming that people listening are intrigued and interested in maybe doing a podcast or just in the content creation itself, is one of the biggest things that I have to overcome with people that I work with. And I almost see it everywhere. I've had to do it with myself. I've created a brand new video channel from zero recently. And I had to overcome this, is that just start the thing whatever it might be. And if you are interested in podcasting, I mean, it might seem so overwhelming, but have the lowest threshold possible to start. You do not have to have a fabulous studio like Kevin here. Kevin's been doing this for a long time. No one is going to get to this level initially. Lower your barriers as quickly as possible and start doing the thing. You'll start figuring out very quickly if it's the thing for you to do. And I think that that's what most people should do if they're, in podcasting, is that they need to lower that threshold and they need to start doing it as quickly and as rapidly as possible to really figure out if it's the thing that they need to do.
We were speaking about earlier, the iteration process, and continue to put in the reps because it will continue to expand and grow as you show up. And in a way, it's then discipline in service of continued expanded creativity.
Very good.
Tying it all back in.
Hey, man. I love that.
A couple final questions for you. Looking forward, where do you see the intersection of podcasting and AI?
At Future Media. No, I'm kidding. No, we're heavily invested in AI right now. It's fully, it's speaking of dropping a barrier, you can produce things so much more efficiently now. There's a lot of companies coming out. We're working on our own technology right now. We're more focused, where I see the opportunity, so this is my personal view, is the full service platform that allows creators to go from A to Z in the entire production process in service of breaking down unbelievable conversations into the moments that will resonate on the right platforms. So that process is where I see the biggest opportunity right now, and the influx of these language models. And basically, if you have a conversation, what do you have? You have a transcript, you have words, feed those words into the language model. Now the trick is building the language models to be able to use the voice and the tone appropriately. We use our own technology to basically put in long form conversations and then be able to look at that entire conversation and then make incredibly strategic decisions on where the most pattern interrupting, intriguing, enticing, and amazing moments that happen. And how can we look at all that, extrapolate it out over the timeline, cut and stitch together all the moments that matter most to get that information in front of the most important people, to get them back into the loop of the long format show. That is what I'm personally focused on, and creating that process that used to take, 5 hours for an episode, now down to an hour and a half. So pretty cool. I mean, I'm just being techie, but to take the efficiency is absolutely insane. And it's only been around for 2 years? So who knows where this is going to fly.
Yeah, and the growth of it's exponential too.
Yeah. It's also terrifying.
A bit. When do you see that platform you're creating launching?
So we're kind of in beta now. We're currently, we practice what we preach. We literally are, the agency is kind of like this big lab. It's like a laboratory. So we're constantly iterating and testing things with our clients. And I am basically wanting to build the thing that I wish I had, but also I'm letting the clientele kind of tell me where this thing will be most effective. So I'm trying not to be too heady and just be so great if it had, this or that. But hey, what do you need most right now? And what would be most effective? And what would work best for you, right? Stuff like that. So I'm definitely using it from I'm testing testing things on them. So everything's in beta. We're still working on it. It's definitely duct taped and glued together. But I would imagine that maybe in the next, probably 4 years or so, that we'll have something that we'd actually want to put out in the world. But I just know with the iteration of all that, and I know that you're in tech and you build things, it takes time, and I'm not willing to put something out that isn't the thing, right? So we're still in experiment beta mode, but we don't even have a name for it.
But I
Project X.
And not a house party.
Yeah, and not a house party.
I like that sometimes though, because then you're product focused, and that's often what makes the best startups in a way flourish is because you're approaching it through the lens of I'm solving this problem from a product focus rather than saying I'm building a company because I want to be a business owner.
Yeah. I want to build the best product possible. And I know the only way to do that is to, back to it, put in the reps with it. But also just not to, it's like do the verb, right? Like literally put it in the hands of other people and us use it and be like, what would we really like to do here? And this would be so much better if, right? And fail a lot. Like that's the currently thing that we're in right now is like, great. Okay. That didn't work. Okay. Great. That didn't work. Okay. Great. That worked. That's great. So it's like 1 out of every 4 right now. And then we find something that's like really cool. I'm super, super bullish and very excited about it. Thanks for asking.
Ike, this has been phenomenal. I sincerely appreciate your time. My final question for you is in line with the name of the podcast, and that surrounds what input of yours specific to podcasting has provided the biggest return?
I think the biggest return from an input has been my ability to listen. And when you have to, I got my start like just doing everything myself and being like a solo guy. And I think I didn't really take it for granted, but I didn't really notice that the amount of time that I sat and I really listened to what people were saying paid off so huge in the end for me, because I was able to actually retain information and know what to do with it. So I think my ability to listen and be quiet has paid very large dividends.
Ike, thank you.
You're welcome.